Hey. Greetings. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Shahida Ahmed, and I am the host of Wombs, Wells, and Waterways, a hidden histories kind of genealogy podcast. And what we focus on is African American research um, that often is not seen in the same line as traditional research pathways. So it's a blended space where we look at research in from different perspectives and in different formats and utilizing different methods. Um, Not that one is better than the other, but collectively they provide a broader and more rich narrative for understanding areas that have been intentionally hidden for African American families and communities. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about New York State records. It's an important uh, threshold as I have had an experience. And so, first, without belaboring this idea of why I'm talking about this today, let me just show you an example of what led to me needing to really address this topic in a public format in this way. So I'm going to take a closer look at a screen, if you can see some of the screen here. One of the things that came up, I was researching an ancestor, and in my research, I wanted to identify some people in the area. And so, as you may already know or may not, um, yes, I am digging deeply into my own family's history. But one of the interesting parts of that kind of research, and it applies to your family's research, is to better understand the community because there are names that will be left out of census records um, that may not have been mentioned by descendants because maybe siblings had passed away earlier. And so I was interested in acquiring information about people with a certain surname that would have been living in this town and may have died in this town. And so part of that is I need a space to research that. And I was researching an area in upstate New York called SCIO, SCIO. And so I finally was able to speak to someone um, and that might be another topic to the fact that it was so hard to reach someone. What I was informed of after leaving several messages and finally getting in touch with someone was that the community, that town has 1,600 people. I didn't know there was towns like that in upstate New York, but I'm getting a feel for it. And then I had mentioned, oh, I'm also I know this town on a map looks like it's maybe 20 minutes or so away. And then she informed me that that town is even smaller than theirs, but I can also call their town clerk. And so I said, okay. And so inside of this question of me how do I the real question for me is how can I access death records that happened prior to 1900? If it exists. And I do sometimes, so many of us are in the space of researching our family members in the South. There are a good portion of us, even if our families are residing north, a lot of our most heartfelt efforts because of enslavement are somehow connected to or deeply rooted in Southern states. And so, or even if we're going across the ocean, we can look at those records too. And so the further you go back, That's usually what it leads to. And so inside of that, I have never really I live in the northern states. So I've never really had to, put my hand on it um from a distant space. But now this New York place is kind of like, let me understand this because now I'm in a unique space where I am very far back, meaning I'm tapping into the 1790s, 1800s, and we are in upstate New York. And so that's a new space for me. Whereas I've previously experienced going further back, being more in the southern region. And so that also may be true here, but it's just the back that we're talking about may be even further back, 1600s, 1700, early 1700s. And so now this idea of upstate New York, yes, slavery was here. People were enslaved here. And then there was a large community in this particular region of Native Americans that were part of what they call the six like a formal registry or government recognized six tribal connection, like a kind of like a governance. And inside of that is where did this occur? And so there are a lot of histories that talk about something that may have come from south and followed to the north. And inside of that, so there's that history that's there. But there's also the history of people that may have been just brought there or have come from the Canadian side, or just even thinking about the Underground Railroad, right? So there's so many intersections in this space, and I'm just even more curious. My DNA has led me to this space, and that's a really eye-opening thing. I would never have come here without that. And so inside of this. So I finally get in touch with this. I first call the numbers that are given on the Google internet in terms of finding vital records. And so this is why I was like, let me talk about this because I've been going in a circle and it's almost very strange from when you mention certain counties, they're like, no one's ever, it's almost as if no one has ever asked us for that kind of information. And so it becomes, hold on. And you can almost hear them talking to another person in the office. Where did we find this? She's asking for vital records that are in 1900 or that are in 1890 something. And they're going kind of, and you can tell that it's on the face value of how much does that person next to you know? Not let me go research this and talk to the people that are in charge. So there's not like a huge span of time where they're like finding out where these things are. They may be right there, but no one has really been questioned about that. And there could be new employees versus an older, more seasoned employee that would have known some of those questions. So we're dealing with a lot at these repositories. And then sometimes they're not always available. So I tried the general state level archival kind of resource. And I'm not sure, it might have just been the vital records vital check kind of, and they say, well, you probably for that year, you might need to contact the county. And I was like, okay, so give me the number for the county. So I called the county and they said, well, let me see, let me ask someone. So that's the second layer. And then they were like, well, you might need to call the town clerk for that particular town. And I was like, oh my, okay, I'll do that. Do you have a phone number? Best. And so as I'm looking at it, first of all, this particular town, Scio, had office hours on Google that were listed as being evening, meaning I'm like, oh, it's 10 o'clock. Let me give them a call. And they're like, Google says they don't open till 5 p.m. And I'm like, that cannot be right. But it turns out it's not correct or updated. Perhaps once upon a time I was, but I'm getting the impression that it's a part-time kind of position. And after finally speaking to someone, and that's coming from me, then I think Tuesday and Thursdays it's closed. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday it's closed, as according to Google. And then Saturday morning it's open from like 8 to 12. So I was just like, let me just call at all the times just in case. But I left messages and they actually called me back um Saturday. So it took a week for me to get in contact with someone. And she did give me the new hours. She said, well, actually it's Tuesday, Thursday, and it's not that much better, but it was like Tuesday, Thursday, I think it was like 12 to 3 or 12, and then Saturday 8 to 12. So it's a very part-time space. So learning about the community there in present time, to really understand what I'm dealing. And she informed me, she was like, well, we're talking about a town that has their, and what she says, from K through high school is in one building. And I said, okay, that's fine. That's not giving me anything, but I am nervous about is how are we dealing with the records in these spaces? What can we do to access those records? So a couple of things came about in our conversation, and I put this here. So I asked for I was like, is there any way, even if I drive up there, if I make the drive, that I can research and I can look through these logbooks for people that have this surname in that region. And so what was told to me was, so she said, well, I can look. She's like, at this moment, I don't think. And so we're dealing with a frontline person that has probably never been asked this question. Well, we do have records. We do have vital records here. And she said the earliest death certificate was 1904, if I'm correct. And I said, oh, okay. That's interesting. It says something different on the website, but that's interesting. So now when we are in this space, I was like, well, I'm looking for someone and I don't really have a death date. I'm searching for someone that I'm saying maybe they died there, right? And so I'm like, so am I able? And so what was told to me was, well, I believe that we are only able to um, share death information. And you can see in these clips how old these books are. Death information from, and I was looking at a death date, not a birth date, but a death date of, I was like, well, the earliest years. I was like, up until 1910. I'm really interested in the 1800s, but let's just see what's there. And she said, well, the only people that I can give that information to is someone who is the parent, a spouse, or sibling, or child. And I said, okay. I said, well, the chances of that happening, that any one of those people are actually still living, is very slim, like almost to none. Like that, someone that died in 1904's parents would still be living today, that their spouse would still be living today, that even their children would be still living today, that their siblings would still be living today. And if so, they could, that would mean the parents would have had them maybe at a later age, but still there could have been a situation where, and there's a period there where there's like a little bit of possibilities that exist in that space. And so I was like, that's a very rare occurrence to have those people still living for the time period I'm requesting. And she said, and so she's kind of like processing it, and she's saying, well, you do have a point. Let me look over this. Let me see what what the rules say. And so, while she's doing that, and I just mentioned, I was like, well, there are some stipulations, and I believe New York is in that group, that actually have, um, like if there's a whole generation that passed by, that the access to them is would be available, regardless of my relation to the person. And so this is and in those things, it's very clear that it's not including, like, when they say children, they're not always meaning grandchildren and great grandchildren. And the reason I say that is because in some records, I do see that they are actually adding that specification that you can be a descendant. In some places, it's not written, so it's worthwhile. But I wanted to check in, so I was like, I felt like I was educating her about some of the things that I learned. So this came from the website for New York State. I just copy and pasted it here. And one of the things that it says is that, there's things that are called historical records. And then there's things that are called certified vital records. And so inside of those kinds of things, from a certified perspective, the government or the office that is governing these or in charge of these records, they do view that as a specific process that's used for legal matters. And so in that case, there may be some reason to, make sure that the person is related. But in an uncertified method, that might be the first part to have, maybe to help you find out if there is a definite connection. That might be the way to go. And so they're grouped under what is called a genealogical record and resource kind of profile, where if you need to, when you go to these places that may not be familiar with it, you do want to be clear about that. And so that it becomes more, okay, so now let me see. And so I just want to highlight some of the things. Like one of the things that was really interesting to me, um, was this idea that birth certificates, there's just a 75-year um, window that is required, um, before a non-family member can have access to it. And so for death certificates, it's 50 years. And so what I was informed or by Google, then a little Google search, is that these are kind of the standard, but it can vary from state to state. And so I wanted to make sure that New York was on board. So this was on New York State's Vital Records website. And so that's clear about the state. And then marriage certificates at least 50 years. Otherwise, you do need to find, it's not considered more of a historical document. And so I met all of those things. Like if we backtrack 75 years, that'll bring us back to like 1950. I'm in 1904, so I shouldn't have any static. But what I'm saying is you can run into these places, and I didn't think it would be in upstate New York. Um, I think of places that, and I didn't know much about this town. There are some waterways that are connected to these areas, but at the same time, when you have a smaller town, sometimes get pushed over to the countryside or larger towns that are surrounding, but they do have records. And so I was like, is there any one that can, I have you all digitized? She said, no, we have not digitized any, none of these have been digitized. And she's like, and the way things are here and our staff, and they probably will not be, at least for another 10, 20 years. And that just broke my, I was like, oh my goodness. So I'm struggling here. Um, and what I am struggling with is the idea that, and that's why usually for someone who's researching their family, if they do not fit with, and they don't know how to, connect the dots and say, well, I can prove that I am a descendant of this person yet. What they need, that's where graveyards become very important. So there's this window where if there's not a death certificate that you can find, or if this window of 75, 50, or 50 years is not applicable, you like say someone died in 1961, 1975, cemeteries become a great resource for people to kind of just scan and find out who may have been buried there. Now, what I'm talking about today are records. So I actually want the death certificate, the official written up document in whatever form that is. What you do find on places like Ancestry and Family Search and other repositories that are not part of this New York State archives or vital records resource is an index, right? So index is slightly different than the actual record itself. And so you may find the date that someone died, but our death record may include the cause of death, it may include the parents or an informant that may help you be a clue. So there's information on either side. Now, so this is what I wanted to highlight. So I'm in upstate New York, but what happens with vital records in New York is there's a very big distinction. Just because New York City is inside the state of New York, the records are not handled in the same way. And I was like, let me share that a little bit. So when you're thinking about what applies and where to find things, you do have to make sure if you're talking about something that's considered part of New York City now, present day New York City, or something that is outside of New York City. And there are some other breakdowns, like Albany and Buffalo can sometimes be separated from other counties that are outside of New York City. But for the most part, New York State and New York City are the great divide, is where the great divide happens with records and where you can find them. And so, but from what I understand, these are the stipulations. So it says vital records um, registration started in New York State outside of, if you're looking for something that's outside of the New York City line, that vital records started around 1881. But there are records, other kinds of records that exist prior to 1881 that relate to New York State and New York City also. And so depending upon that, that's where we go. And so, so many of us, when we're working, if we're not going far back to the early 1800s, if we're in 1850s or things that are closer to probably the Civil War or after the Civil War, we're sometimes looking at results of the Great Migration. And so those are more often connected to New York City. And so a lot of our research has been centered there. But I think this is an important pitfall because there's the language that's used that I could understand why the woman was kind of confused. So on the left-hand side, it's like, who can order a New York death certificate? And that's on like just a general gov page that it says, if you are not the spouse, the parent, sibling, or adult child of the descendant. You see, there's no like, you could be the adult grandchild, the adult great grand, it's not, it's the adult child of the descendant. you must submit additional documentation. And these documentations is pretty much like you might need to be a, you might need to either hire a lawyer. It's going on that side of official documentation. But the idea is that the language here is saying that these are only issued to, so I can imagine someone seeing this, and it was, she almost recited this verbatim to me on the phone, and I said, wait a second. But then when you go to the look at the right side, we're looking at genealogy records and resources. We can see that there is a clarification about how records, what records are allowed. And on the left-hand side, for the most part, if it is not a historical document, it is almost always required that it's certified. Like you have to get the certified copy. Historical documents do not have to be certified. So there's some type of fine line around what that means. And for the most part, there's nothing free for these for New York State. There's no free documentation at all. So you're gonna pay for the uncertified just as you would pay for the certified. So just be clear about that. And so there's time, the only exception to this in terms of say, there's only 49 years instead of 50, you would have to prove some type of direct line of descendants. That's when descendant is used. It's not used on the certified wording. And so I want to bring that up. And if you know different, please comment because to be a descendant for a certified copy it's not in the language here, but it is when you're talking about a historical document. So so after all of that, she was not she first of all, she was probably the only one in the office. There was no like, let me check in with someone. Giving the small size of that county, of that town, that's not surprising to me. And then on a Saturday morning, she was the only one there. I'm convinced. And so she's like, you know what? We came to a standstill, and I was like, well, I'm looking for this surname in between this period and that period, and I'm stuck. I was like, I really feel like I do have access. I should have access to these documents, but I'm also, I could drive 6, 7 hours there and still not gain access to like, she's like, I can't allow you to just flip through the book because then it would be, um, I'd be violating the law. And I was like, huh? What? And so honestly and truly, I feel like if it's going to be in your courthouse, you need to find, or your town clerk's office, you need to find a way to set up a place for people to search and find. Um, but also on the other side is, should these books really be in an archive? Should there be, I mean, unless they're 50, maybe it's time to shift to an archive so that things can start to become digitized. Because waiting 10 years for this is not something I want to do. Right. And so I'm willing to move make the movement necessary to go. But when she said, so we were at it, I gave her, and she said, I found two people already that matched that surname that passed away and that time frame. And I said, oh. And so there was silence on the phone. And I'm like, okay, I would really like to see it. Like I don't know what what should I say? Like you're already telling me I can't see it and I can't come there. And I was like, what are you saying? Will you scan it for me? What, help me out. And so I was like, well, how should we proceed now that you found it? And so there was another long pause. And she said, well, I can, do you have an email? And I was like, yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I do. And I was like, she's like, well, I can send what I find. I was like, oh. Thank you so much, Yes. And so I was all excited when later that day I was expecting that perhaps it would be another week. But later that day she sent me, and this is what I received. I was kind of like, what? So what she described to me were these very long books. So essentially, this image at the top and the image at the bottom were probably side by side, right? So they're, and look at the information, father's name, mother's name, right? And so I know where I live, there, these books exist in the town's office, in the city hall. And what they do, they don't take an image this, but they pull the information off of this and put it on a sheet of paper that fills in all the information. So there's some drawbacks to that because I've seen people misspell or they'll try to correct something that they think should be corrected based upon how the handwriting looks or something of that sort. And so things can get lost in translation when it's moving from one document to the next. So you want to be clear about that. But I've never denied access. It's just that I can't take the book home. But I could take a picture of it, but they was still what I was going to pay for was this document that's kind of like a template, and they would write in all the information that was on this particular book from this particular page. And so it becomes like a unofficial death document. Um, and so this was kind of, so this is from 1904, right? Well past the 75-year mark. Okay. Like try 75 plus, let me see, 1950. So plus another 46 years. So we're out of that window where I need the document. I need to see, I would like to see the page. I would like to know what other information I can gather from this. And so I imagine myself seeing this at like a archive. All right. And having just asking them and sitting at a desk and flipping through the pages and being able to assess what information I need. And so this is a hindrance for me as a researcher. But this, I was so surprised to see these little strips of, I was like, oh, let me click on it because so enlarged. And I was like, oh no, this is the enlarged image. So this is the register of deaths in this particular town. And that seemed the cause of death, time from the attack till death, the medical attendant, the place of burial, all these are really important things. And so this is some of the other strips. So she's intentionally covering the other names with a white sheet of paper. And I'm like, what are we protecting in terms of privacy? Like the fact that they died, this is historical information that we need. And there is an organization, I would try to post it, that I heard about that helps people get access to documents that legally are available to the public. And so that this might be one of those cases. So there's different things here, and they're out of order here. So I really don't know if this gets attached to the back of this. Um, and I was like, I sent a follow-up email, is there any way that you could just send me the page, photograph of each of these pages? That would be so helpful. She said she would look into it to follow up to make sure that she wasn't. And I just acknowledged to her that those same rules that I saw on the New York State's website. And so I will send her the link, I think, as a follow-up so that she can see what is clearly the state. So that I want to share why we're doing this. So the next part I want to show, and I'm going to share the screen so that you can see a little bit about what we're doing here today. And it's such an interesting piece when you start to think about how how we get to this place. If you ever have gone to the website and uh, what you'll see is that the website itself is um, very overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. I mean, it goes down to the history of the place, to whatever the place records are there. It talks about for this period of time, it's at this place. For another period of time, it's at, and it kind of jumps around. Um, I don't think I have it opened on my screen, but if you just go to the website directly, it is a mess in terms of like really figuring out what exactly am I doing, you know? So I wanted to organize it so it's not so clear. So first of all, the most important part of these charts and tables is that we're looking at the state of New York. And what I want to be clear about is that what we're looking at with these green dots here is that these are places that are specifically for the state of New York, not New York City. So anything without a green dot next to it, which is the first two, three rows. Let me be very, let me do this correctly. Um, the first three rows are essentially um, New York City, right? And so I've created charts in different forms. So we're not just looking at it and from one angle. But these repositories, these are the three main repositories. We have the New York City archives, municipal archives. You have the New York City Department of Health and mental hygiene, but for the most part, the New York City Department of Health. And then there's the New York State Department of Health, and actually for New York State Archives. So these are the four main places that you will find and then there's okay, the fifth one here is kind of what I where at the level where I was, where you're kind of, and this is for New York City, but I would say they have, you can do that for upstate New York also, places outside of New York City, is that there is a clerk's office, a town clerk, something that's very local. You would go to that particular town's office, city hall in some places, town hall in other places, to look for more present day information. But for our work here, we're looking at historical documents. And so those are the, and so I wouldn't, lean in on that. But what I want to be clear about even more is that the areas that these records covered. So we're looking at this idea of um, the area of New York City. There you go. And then we also are looking at the area of New York State, right? And when we're talking about New York State, and this is very important in the language of the pages that you'll see on Google, is that when New York State is referenced, it is not including New York City. Right? So just because the state might be addressed, New York City is not considered to be, not with historical documents, not when it comes to that. And so there's so many things. If and so I wanted to like look at the date ranges, right? So I'm looking at deaths. This will be ideal. Now, this is just a range. And so what you'll find is they'll say 1795 to 1948, but they'll have a concentrated um time period, meaning they might have a few documents from 1795 and a few documents from this time, but most of the documents are within this window. And so This is just really take that range with a grain of salt to just say, well, perhaps. And so this is what's really interesting. New York City, boom, they got it into their stuff between having manumission, apprenticeships, and this is all at the archives, right? But when you go to the state level, outside of New York City, the time periods become very 1881 to present, that kind of thing. And that's really through the Department of Health. If you're trying to go beyond 1881 or before the Civil War, right? That's kind of where I am. You're interested, you would want to look at the state archives. And so here's the thing. That's a great method. Now, what happens is once you start to get down to the town and the city that you're interested in, or even the county, um, like the town I was, Scio, those records are not, no one came in and took photographs of those records. Family Search does not have them. They may have an index. They do not have these records for online use. There's also the idea that when you are looking at something pre-1880, and it could go pretty far back, even into the 1600s, you can find these are really cool. So there's the small pockets of information that will not be there. So we're still working, and this is the dilemma in the genealogy world of research, is that no one place has everything. Not even the archives, not even the state archives, right? And it's even down to you might have to do both. You want to look at the larger archive, but you need to go and check out the towns and even run the risk of being confronted by this idea that the people at in the smaller towns may not be aware of all of the guides and rules around record access. And so, and may have no intention or don't have the manpower to actually make a digitized version happen. And so in my head, I was like, oh, I just need to get a grant to go and do the work because how that would help so many. And so they do have church registers, vital records, manumissions, military pensions, the almshouse or poorhouse, apprenticeship records. And that's really going to be important, especially in upstate, because I think around 1827, what was said on paper is that slavery was illegal at least in that region of New York. However, what we're also acknowledging is that there are quite a few waterways around there. We're acknowledging that there were maybe not directly enslaved, but they could easily be hired as indentured servants very frequently. And also, if you're thinking about this being a path that was on the Underground Railroad, we're going to have people that will show up out of the blue in those spaces. And so this is a real interesting thing. So let's continue because I want to share just a couple of other document ways that I've organized this information. So here's another one. This is the timeline of vital records. So what's in green is New York City, and what's in blue is New York State, right? But let's look at the different periods. So this breaks down the periods a little bit more. Just saying before 1880 is really good, but let's look at that. How about let's go before 1880s. There's like a gazillion, not gazillion, but there's there are a lot of time periods that we can see because we can get more specific. And that's what happens on the general websites. And this is almost like when we look at DNA, and I try to coach people to say, you know, you do need to have a way to document where you need to go. Don't just leave it on the internet because we are still trying to figure this out together. So in this space, 1880 is here. Before 1880 is all of these periods of time here. We have um, after the Civil War. We have Civil War registration reform, because these are ways that, and so the reason why I'm tagging this aspect of it is that there are so many ways that these repositories are grouping records. So it's not always going to be like, oh, this is the pre-1880 group. That record or a type of document that meets that qualification could be grouped in a different kind of category where it could be uh, things that relate to the Civil War. That's a pre-1880, but the document may be inside of a different kind of named record set. You have gradual abolition, and that's just, what's happening. Early America, English colonial, and Dutch colonial. And I'm learning a little bit more about these areas now too. And then pre-colonial, there is, from what I read about, what they call um, these records that relate to, I think I'm saying it, Lenape nations. And so one of the things that comes from this is just like it could be something, right? And these things can exist at the New York State level, and excluding New York City, and the New York City level, right? So what you have right below it is where you can find the records. So for these pre-colonial, they are directing you to go to talk to descendants of these tribes, and that as a form of, and so some of these could be documented as oral histories and such. So that is, and this is what I mean by what we do at Wombs, Wells, and Waterways, is that we don't discount the just because it's not in the typical format of a census record or something that is government issued, that there are research spaces that have archival information, historical documentation that may be oral, it may be within certain groups, it may be on a reservation, whatever, it is there. And so here's another one. There, inside of these periods, a lot of these documentations, and so I found, and I don't think I have it ready to share, but I did find a document around someone around the surname that I'm researching in upstate New York, or actually in I believe it was in Pennsylvania. But that was also one of the stops on the way, that it was a death record. And so, researching so long in South Carolina, you're just used to, like, if someone didn't die after this time, I probably don't have a certificate. But this was like written on a sheet of paper. It's like Sarah such and such died on this day, and it tells them like what their color or race was. It says, it doesn't say much more, but it does tell you that it came from a church, that this was a slip of paper written from a church book, right? And so now I know about the church. They had the name of the church. So now I can go and look further into those records. And so we have church records, which can be found at the state archives, but also it can also be found at the certain church, whether it's the Presbyterian church, the entire system is not always in the archives. Um, and then New York City, this is municipal archives, and it has a special number. And so it gets kind of, you just leave it on the internet and you're just reading a page in long form. We need to organize so that you can get your research done in the most efficient way and know who to contact. All right, that didn't work. Let's try this. So town and church registers that go into the late 1700s, they're saying the town clerks and state archives will be your best bet. And this is for the New York State. We're staying on the blue side for today, but county clerks and churches, state archives and county clerks, a lot of these state places, they mention archives, but then don't mention archives by themselves, right? It's not until after 1880 that you start to see the Department of Health. And if you can note here, and this is what gets a little confusing on the long form website, is just that they do separate Albany from other parts of. So th- there's a little bit of you can check. I would check here, but Albany specifically um, would be in a separate category than other counties or cities in the larger New York State. And so those become, and as you get into more into the 1800s, um, I'm sorry, 18, yeah, late 1800s, Civil War periods, or even maybe the Revolutionary War, you can start to bring in the National um, Archives and Records Administration. So the NARA organization will have records, and this is starting to look. So my quest was really focused on vital records, but I added related records because sometimes vital records can be associated with court documentation, and so we don't want to leave that out. But I thought, it might not hurt to like take a closer look at what's going on here. And the last thing I wanted to share is like, so can any of this be accessed online? And the short answer is no. Like just go straight to the let's just go straight to the last column. Like, no. What's not on uh, um there's no full text searchable index so that you can't look at an index, click on it, and get to the actual original document. That's not happening. Not, and that's across just about all the time periods. It's not online. And if you're looking for something at the archives that predates 1880, you are going to have to go there in person. All right. And it's usually a fee that's associated with it. And um, so when it comes to the Department of Health, um, so here we're just looking at New York State, right? New York City, that's another conversation, but New York State, we're looking at things that are online. And so we have the New York State Department of Health. You can get certified copies, and usually you can get it from VitalCheck. You have to have um, so recently they mentioned like that there was some type of embargo. As of May 2025, now we are now able to get his access to historical documentation through VitalCheck. It was not the case, not at least for New York State, that you could do that before. And so, at least if it, yeah. So the other part, genealogy copies, order via mail or online if eligible, absolutely. But you cannot find the actual document online. What you can find are indexes. All right. And so Internet Archive is kind of like I think their goal and mission in that is to help you find where on the internet. It's kind of like you're looking for that book. What are all the libraries that have that book? And so it kind of helps direct you to places that may be closer to you, or maybe there's only one place that has it, and it'll tell you in that way to help you with your search guide. It's kind of like Google for genealogy, for repositories. And so you can see an index, and sometimes Family Search or Ancestry can have indexes available, but that's about it. Um, You have to document it and then try to seek out more information. But it would definitely not have the parents' names, you know. And so then we have New York State Archives, and they just kind of tell you what file, what box it's in, and you have to go there. Um, from what I understand about like New York State, for the most part, it is his. There is a general idea of moving things to a digital space, but it has not. There's a timeline on that that's not so short that it just needs some more encouraging to get things moving along in that way. And so one of the so that's what I want to close out with. New York City is a slightly different. You would go to the New York City Municipal, what is it called? I always New York City's Municipal Archives. And I would start there for these date ranges, but you would go there to inquire about it. And most of the things, like I have relatives that have died in New York City, and it's weird. It's not something where you can go and search it and say, "Oh, that's my relative. That's the one I want." But you do have to find a way to get as close to the date or the year because they're essentially performing a search in that way. So it can be kind of frustrating in that way. Here we have some tips that came from the site. So there is information about this embargo allowed for these periods to be placed. Um, and this is for historical documents. Um, and there's a proposal for May that came out in May 2025 um, to expand public access. Um, it's yeah, it's going to be slow. It has not been implemented. Um, the Department of Health does not provide free online certificates, so you can order them if you're able to give them the information and it matches up and all of the good stuff. Um, but the archives, you can use it to find the index and then order what you need. But New York State is not like the easiest place to navigate if you don't know all of the information for your relatives. But for the sake of going there, at least I hope that you can gain some an insight into what you would want to, what place you would want to contact first, and to decrease any type of ideas around the shock of, hey, why? Well, why not? Well, I can't come and just search. I learn a little bit more? And to be honest, the snippets of paper that she did find, all the surnames that she found were African American or people who were considered themselves as Black during that time. And um, in a short space of time, like that was just someone who was not connected to this story of this research, just doing a blanket search and finding those names. And now I'm like, let me go back to Ancestry and see who they are and finding out who they were. Because what I do want to know is where they were buried. And it's not always going to be on Find a Grave as you would like, and finding the connections because oftentimes, and I'm going to stop sharing here, is that sometimes our families may live in one place and die in another. And also that they could have died in a place that is a little bit away from where their major family connection is or the hub of their family connection is. Sayo was I think was one of those places. And because I have done other research around mapping the movement of different relatives, it's just a tedious task of not wanting to have one more barrier to actually, if a record exists, I want to see it. Why not? And so we need to push more for getting access to things that we should have access to. That's one thing I want to bring up. And I will look for the organization that I learned about that is doing, it's a nonprofit that's actually doing that work. And quite frankly, some of those records connect to immigration, pensions. There are places that have, there's like another record group. It's so amazing that these places, these records exist, but they exist in almost like in the hundred, like 100,000 or 10,000 boxes of said files are saying sitting somewhere where we are not able to access. And more importantly, we're not going to be able to access it online. And so to just think about that, not everything burned down. Like I said, okay, we have access to some of these things and we're just not giving it. And so some part of our work may require demanding it, um, educating people that may not have experienced this kind of um, questioning or this level of research or inquiry that, would help them in their journey and is still a legal thing. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you found some uh, benefit in what I've shared today. And take care. Have a blessed day.